going to switch into restorative practices. So as a beginning, we have a student support team. We have Lisa Norville and Jeff Rivera, who are our deans. And we have Tiffany Garland, Vantreese Holloman, and Hannah Sherman, and Dr. Barry, who are our counselors, and Meg and I are both also on the student support team. Our team meets every week. We have a rolling agenda where we divide our meetings up into proactive things that we're going to be talking about to make sure that we're pushing in. Our student support team is pushing into third, fourth, and fifth grade classes right now to do some reintroductions, to do some walking through student contracts, and just norm on some behaviors in our upper elementary. We talk about things that are coming up in the community that we need to address and how we're going to address it. And so we balance as much as we can the proactive and the reactive in those student support team meetings. Oh, and our student support team has all participated in lots of professional learning around restorative practices. The DOE office that works on restorative practices, we've been selected to receive a grant to help us to develop our systems and structures, and to support that work. It also comes with connections to be able to train people. There's like, different tiers of the training that people can participate in, resources that come with that. We have somebody from that team coming to do a larger restorative practices professional learning for our whole staff. That's happening later this month. And so we're excited to be connected to outside experts who are coming in to support us, and also have connections to other schools who are engaged in this work as well.
So you'll see once we get started on this topic, there is so much to unpack and so much to think about. And so we're going to continue to try to be streamlined here, and there'll be opportunities to continue the conversation. But I just want to bring a little sort of clarity to, like, what is the idea of restorative justice? And we hear some of these terms around, and I just want to, ground us in what we mean when we say restorative justice. And students and for the adults in our communities, that when harm happens, that there is an opportunity to repair that harm. And so to be really concrete, if you think back to anytime you've had a conflict, or you think about conflicts that you had in school when you were a student, some of the traditional and typical ways to dealing with a conflict for kids is for a consequence to be meted out. So a student does something to somebody else, and there is a detention, there is a suspension, an adult is notified, a consequence is decided, and then kids move on. A lot of times without any structure and any support in repairing that relationship. And if you think yourself of people that you've had conflicts with, the awkwardness, the tension that arises from having lack of closure from an incident, not being able to name your feelings around that incident, not being able to say what you need from the other person to make it right. And these structures are supported by the adults in our student support team, a lot of times in something called a restorative conversation or a restorative conference. And that looks like maybe two students, something has happened, there's been a conflict over social media, somebody has used some very unkind language about another student, that comes to us. Students both, there's a pre-conference ahead of time for each student to be able to make sure they're in agreement and ready to come together. They're ready to acknowledge that this conflict and this problem exists, that they're ready to acknowledge their part in it. They're ready to hear the repair that needs to happen from the other person. and they're willing to go into this space with some curiosity and to be led by an adult to facilitate this conversation. Now, I think a lot of times people feel like it's this either or of we're gonna talk through it and that's it, or there's going to be some sort of punitive consequence and that's it. And really at our school, both are happening simultaneously. And so I think that there's sometimes when you read about restorative justice or you hear conversations that it means, oh, like no punitive consequences, just sort of talking through a situation, and really we're committed, when there has to be a consequence, there's a consequence. We follow New York City Department of Education Blue Book. That's a guideline that is also very in line with restorative practices. And there's a continuum when a conflict arises of options that we have in terms of responding to that. But the key part of our commitment to the restorative justice part is that students are gaining the skill in being able to name the problem, name how they were harmed, name what they need from their classmates or from adults in terms of accountability and repair moving forward. And those are skills that I think if we reflect on ourselves as adults in conflicts that we have, those are incredibly valuable and incredibly important in being able to move past something and have resolution and learn. This process also takes a lot of time. When we talk about the pre-conference, the conference, then the communication with families, following back up with students. It takes a lot of time. And we'll talk a little bit about like some of the issues that are bubbling up for us as we're grappling with our work around restorative justice. But I think, a way to think about it is really an opportunity in a structured, safe way with an adult to be able to name harm and work towards resolution. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about restorative justice.
Wanted to just take a little bit about a little bit of time to talk a little bit about what the steps in the process are. As Meg said, it takes time. While we have the steps, sometimes the steps are not exactly linear. And very first thing that we do every single time an incident is brought to us is we investigate. And one thing that we are seeing a lot of, and that is not uncommon in children, is that once you ask questions and you uncover and you get down to the heart of what's happening, what's up here and what everybody's talking about is different from what actually happened. And the investigation is really, really important. And it's really important that we're calm and that we take our time with that. And, it could unfold many different ways and many different times. There could be many different motivations behind an incident. There could be, there's just so much that we learn by talking to kids about what happened and asking questions. And so, I think a lot of times kids come home and they say, oh my God, this thing happened. And then it's like, oh, that happened? What? And I think the next step always has to be, did you hear that happen? Did you see that happen? Tell me more about what happened. Who else saw it? Who else did you talk to? Did you talk to an adult at school about this? I think all of these are really important. That's what we do. And I think it's super important for families because to do that as well at home. Next, depending on what the results of the investigation are and what the different situation and what the incident is, families of impacted people will be contacted. If it's something that's like super widespread, sometimes that group is the group that's been impacted is larger. And we share with information with folks who are impacted. And then the next step is a restorative conversation, or a restorative circle, depending on what happened. As Meg said, folks have to be like a conversation around healing. It's important for people to be willing to be part of that process, because if they're not, sometimes they can cause more harm to the community. And so that's a constant, sort of, it's based on individuals present in some of these kinds of ways. The last thing we would want is for a restorative conversation to cause more harm. And so it's important that everybody is really ready to have those conversations. And in those conversations and circles, there are rules, there's a format, it's a structured and facilitated conversation, that can be a really, really powerful place for growth, and a place for students to build relationships, even when there weren't relationships before. Often people feel much closer after that happens. And then, as Meg said, when there is the need for another consequence, we tried to, there's the logical consequences. So for actions and harm that's done, what is a logical consequence for that? And so consequences look in different kinds of ways. And if you ask I ask my kids, like, so what does it mean for somebody to like get a consequence? What is that for you? And it's like detention, suspension, or expulsion. Those are like the three things. And those are not the only, three things. Kids can have time where they need a lunchtime reflection to respond to some prompts. It's not that those three things don't exist, but we look for more meaningful and logical consequences that are going to have an impact on changing the behavior, not just saying this was wrong and so this is your consequence. And I think that's another, when we get into the tensions, and that's another thing that we're grappling with and that we're excited to learn more from kids. We're going to do some empathy interviews, which is asking folks a set of questions to learn more about the experience of students, because it is coming up over and over. And this is something that we also talk to our restorative justice, like folks at Central about also, like, this is coming up, that there's a perception that because there's not an expulsion or because you still see the kid in school, that nothing is happening. And it requires a mindset shift, to look at things in a different kind of way, to understand the process as the thing, that that is the thing that's happening. But at the end of the day, if there is a perception that nothing is happening, that's important for us to pay attention to and recognize and better understand where that perception is coming from. And so we both want to continue to name the process and name that the process is the thing. And we also want to learn more from folks about, how we can help for that perception to change.
And just adding on a little bit to this sort of idea of making it more visible to kids of what is happening. Again, like naming some of the tensions that exist. There's confidentiality for students. And so like when an outcome is reached after a certain event, it's not something that, is blasted publicly what the outcome is. So sometimes we're not part of a conversation. We're not part of a consequence. And so they assume that nothing has happened. And so we want to partner with families and staff and talk to kids about just how to grapple with this, because a lot is happening. Hours and hours of work is happening. And like it's a difficult perception to sort of unpack and to work around and with. And so we just want to name it. That feels like the first step. And also to say that And another thing that I want to just keep sort of echoing with parents and with kids is like, did you tell anyone? Does anyone know? And so that's something else when we hear students saying like, well, there's this problem and no one is helping. And I think a really first important question is like, have you spoken to an adult? Have you spoken to a classmate? Who have you told? Because sometimes there's this assumption that we all are aware of something when we're really not. And so that's another sort of issue that we're grappling with, and we want to partner with families and with kids and with teachers to continue to sort of unpack. Also for students of all ages, sometimes there can be sort of a fixation on ideas of fairness and justice that can be a little bit oversimplified, that can be sort of steeped in bias. And that's something that we're also unpacking. Situations are not nearly as clear as one might want, or as a student might perceive. And that's something that we're also continuing to grapple with and think through. Another trend that we name with the students and feels important to name with parents and to continue to think about partnering through is this this pattern we're noticing of kids trying to insert themselves in other people's drama and conflicts, and this idea of if you see something happening that you're gravitating towards it, either physically by moving over or by being a bystander in a group chat or in a problematic conversation where you're sort of fueling the flames by being a spectator. And that's something that we're seeing both in group chats and also, in the yard, and I think it's again, as adults, we can reflect on like this sort of natural curiosity when you think something is happening to want to sort of be drawn to it. And it takes some real discipline and training to slow yourself down, reel yourself back, and realize this moment has nothing to do with you, that it's not entertainment or fun, and that it's something happening with someone else. And it's not, none of these are new topics, but I think things are continually evolving as technology evolves. And we're learning, we're asking questions. And right now we're in the process of just naming some of the trends and some of the struggles that we see. And that's another one. I think timelines. Both Pilar and I speak with our own kids about these sorts of issues. And I think if you don't act quickly, by the time you get to a restorative conversation, kids have sort of moved on, or it feels less relevant, or by the time you gather all the evidence and investigation and make the phone calls and talk to the kids and get all the adults in the same place, it's important to do that quickly, very carefully, but also quickly, so that kids feel as though they're being centered. You want to pop in, Pilar, with any more tensions that we're thinking through? This is becoming great.
I mean, I wanted to something to what you were saying before. I just wanted also to bring this back to support our priority of supporting all learners, and that the consequence doesn't always look the same for everybody. And I just want to call out that all of our students are our students. All of our students are children. All of our students are in our care to learn, and no matter what has happened, we go into it with what does this kid need, and how can we make this a learning experience? And different kids have different needs, and the learning looks different, and sometimes the expression towards other kids look different. And so I think that's just an important piece of information for us also to think about, as we are an inclusion school, and as we have all different types of folks who learn in some different kinds of ways. I want to just, I want to name sort of name the timeline as one of our priorities, and like how we named that this is complicated, that there's lots of steps, that there's lots of people involved. And we name that streamlining this process, having it happen quickly, having all the communications happen to all the people that need communications in a timely way, that those are some of the things where there's a lot of room for error when we're talking about lots of different people and coordinating, just thinking, I have to talk to the teacher about this, I have to talk to the advisor, I have to talk to the parent, the kids, the counselor. There's like so many different people. And that's one place where we recognize that this is a main goal for us, is to streamline communication and to work on timelines. We also just want to share, like in that communications, we communicate with the people who are directly involved and the stakeholders, the people who are involved in the incident. We share information, like via the newsletter, via Jupiter Blast to the whole school, when there is something that is whole school, relevant to the entire community, and the entire community has been impacted. And then we message specific information about specific incidents, on, like to the people who are impacted it. If there's a grade, if there's a class, if there's a group of people who have been impacted, if there's an advisory, those are the people who would get the communication. I think that's it on that.
Some parents are asking, like, what can we do to partner at home? What can we do to support? And, you sort of started at the beginning by talking about leading with curiosity and how important that is. It's really, really easy. I just reflect on myself, how much better I've gotten at this as a teacher, as an administrator over time, of just slowing things down and saying, wait a minute. So if a kid says something, or if you see a post, or you see a response, to not just take it as face value fact, and to really start to think through, like, wait a minute, what happened? Like, why did that happen? What was the motivation behind that behavior? What was that person feeling? What baggage and life experience does that person bring that informs some of that behavior? What experiences do I have that affect my judgment and my thinking about what I see? And there's so much to unpack, and it's so important to just slow it down and not respond instantly. And so if your kid comes home really, really upset, or when a kid comes to me, I usually start by saying, like, wow, this sounds really hard. I can see you're upset. I can see that your friend is upset. Like, this is really hard. It's really hard to be a human. And there's so much truth to that. And then slowly starting to ask questions. What did you see? Did you hear this? Did you hear it yourself? Or did someone tell it to you? So often students are reporting things that they've heard from other people. I can't tell you how many times I think I have an understanding of a situation, and then it turns out that a kid wasn't even there. They're just reporting something that they heard, and they're so passionate with their loyalty with their friends that they just escalate their impression of a situation because they're trying to be a good friend. And then it turns out sometimes that actually maybe they don't know what they're talking about. And so I think assuming best intentions, it doesn't mean hard things don't happen, but like sort of slowing things down, assuming best intentions, getting more nuanced in your ability to sort of ask the right questions that get to the situation. And sometimes say, I don't think we're going to understand what really happened. I think this is just too complicated. There's too many perspectives. There's too many sides that we don't know about. This sounds like we need some adult help here. We need somebody from the school to help us navigate this.
We have lots more to share. I know as a parent, you're hearing all this and you're like, whoa, there's a lot of things, I couldn't write it down. We are going to share resources with you this weekend in the newsletter, and there will be more information. And really quickly, we are not skimping on joy. I know the Oscar music's playing, but we need to talk about joy. We need all the joy we can get. We're excited about the Art Expo. Community Sing. I'm sorry, pre-K and kindergarten families last month that we weren't able to accommodate and fit in the gym, but next month we're going to figure it out. We're getting everybody. That is a joyful time. We're excited about Black Lives Matter week of action at school and month of action and purpose. We are excited about all the celebration. We're going to have a public installation that folks can interact with when they come for the Art Expo. We will share more about their overnight trips, and lots of clubs and extracurriculars, basketball, go girls basketball. We had our first home game on Friday and we won. And our Broadway musical, The Junior, is underway. So joy.